Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first event of the year here, and I'm glad that you folks are here. It's From Road Building to Riots, how the city of Charlotte, North Carolina uses social media to communicate in both good times and bad, presented by the Center for Digital Government and Government Technology in partnership with our good friends ArchiveSocial. My name is Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow here at the Center for Digital Government, and we are very glad that you guys have attended today. For you folks who aren't aware of us, the Center for Digital Government is a national research and advisory institute on information technology and best practices in state and local government, and we have a diverse and dynamic set of programs and services. We provide public and private sector leaders with decision support, knowledge, and opportunities. We help them effectively incorporate all of these new technologies, folks, in this 21st century. So I'm excited to be the moderator today, and I just want to say thank you for joining us. This is going to be a fun 60 minutes, folks. A lot of good stuff here. City of Charlotte's done a lot of great things, and they have a lot of good stories to tell you. But before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody within 48 hours. Now, you can use this recording for your reference or pass it along to your colleagues, folks who could not attend today. It's designed to be interactive, so at the bottom, folks, you're going to see a Q&A button down there. Please, we encourage you to hit that Q&A button. Send us questions. We love questions. We're going to handle all of those at the very end. And if you have any other questions, make sure that you'll see a help desk or you can download the PDF. The slides down at the bottom. There's a webinar resources widget at the bottom of the console, so click that. You can download a PDF of the slides today. And also during today's webinar, just use hashtag GovTechLive, get on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, share it with them. And at the close of the webinar, there is one important thing I'd like to ask you folks. We actually have a survey that's going to pop up, and we want to hear what you think. We've actually made improvements. We've added new types of features, new types of webinars and presentations. One is an academy. We have an expanded version of this where we actually go much deeper based on the feedback from you folks. So please click the survey widget at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, it'll pop up when the seminar concludes. Disable your pop-up blockers. If you have any media player issues or any other problems, we have a webcast help guide. Just click help at the bottom of the console. Our crack staff, Marcus from On24, will be glad to help you folks out. Now, so let's get to the fun part. So joining me today in this very timely topic is Ken Brown. He's the City of Charlotte Strategic Communications Manager, and Anil Chawla. He's the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. But before we get to those folks, and we're going to go through that, it's going to be me, then we're going to turn it over to Ken, go to Anil, and then finish up with Q&A. I'm just going to kind of set the stage real quick, because one of the things I've learned from doing these webinars with ArchiveSocial and some other folks, a lot of folks think that this is complex, that trying to manage social media is tough. You might do cut and paste. You might have different backup solutions. So you're thinking, oh, my gosh, it's too complicated. What am I going to do? Well, that's not the problem. Actually, folks, the problem is you. You have actually made it too hard. It's not that hard. Why is it not that hard? It's actually very easy when you just apply the right kind of technology, the right kind of policies, the right kind of training. So what we're going to do, part of the goal of this webinar today, is to go through a few do's and don'ts. We're going to show you some of the things you can do. Charlotte's got some great stories about some of the things they've done. Anil's also going to talk to you about some of the things that have challenged agencies, things around the First Amendment, deleting tweets, what are some of your risks, how to do risk management with this. And then guess what? If we do our job and we help you do your job, we're going to turn you into a social media superhero. So what we're going to do is I get to now introduce Ken Brown to you. Now, before I get too far involved with Ken, now Ken is the communication specialist at the City of Charlotte. Let me get to a poll question here first, and then I'm going to read you the rest of Ken's impressive bio. So let's go to our first poll question. So what is your opinion on social media as a public record as a public record? A, it's definitely a public record by law. It might be a record, but our activity isn't worth retaining. You feel strongly that it is not a public record, or you don't know. So is it definitely a public record by law? It might be a record, but your activity isn't worth retaining. You feel strongly it is not a public record, or I don't know. And I'm going to leave that up while I just finish the rest of Ken's bio. So Ken is a communication specialist with the City of Charlotte. He serves as the social media manager responsible for strategy, content development, and engagement across the city's corporate social channels. He's led the city's social efforts through major events, such as the 2012 Democratic National Convention. I was a senior law enforcement advisor for the 2012 Republican National Convention, so Ken and I shared some good stories around what we saw there. He's also done multiple citywide engagement efforts and police community relations issues. He is a North Carolina native, a UNC Charlotte graduate, and a diehard Knicks fan. Well, you had me there until you said Knicks fan. But hey, let's see what the results here are, Ken. Well, Ken, look, 75% of the people, and we've got a wide range of people coming in from all over the country, but they say it's definitely a public record by law. about 5% say it might be a record, but their activity isn't worth retaining. About 3% say it's not a public record, or about 16% don't know. I mean, it seems to me that with a lot of people saying that it's definitely a public record by law, you've actually got a lot of weigh in on this. So, Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me. Again, my name is Ken Brown, and I am the social media manager for the city of Charlotte. And today I'll be sharing some learnings coming out of some recent high-profile events that we've seen here in Charlotte, and how social media has played a key part in the engagement and served as a critical role in communications during these moments of crisis. But before I get into the stories, I'd like to touch on sort of the evolution of our social media here in Charlotte. I joined in 2012, but the city started using social media in 2009. And at that point, the city understood that they needed to be on social, as most organizations were at the time, but they weren't ready to dive all the way in. So at that time, we put in place a policy that was really restrictive. It did not allow us to interact with our followers, and unless it was regarding a service issue or an emergency, we cannot interact or respond or allow comments on our pages. So our efforts were really a one-way conversation on social. And the tweet below you'll see on the deck on the left was pretty much all we did on social, was push information out to our people. There was no two-way conversation or any dialogue. So after a few years, as we're examining the social landscape and looked at other cities and what they were doing, we decided that it was time to open up our policy and allow and encourage engagement. And I threw in a quick tweet to the right of the first tweet, kind of illustrate that. And this was a quick shot that we took last year during the Panthers playoff run, Super Bowl run, as they were playing the Arizona Cardinals. And we were able to jump into a conversation that wasn't really about government, but it was really a fun topic to kind of jump in on. And under the old policy, that never would have happened. But now we have the ability to step out of our box a little bit and join the conversation and follow our residents to find out what they're talking about. Another change that we've made more recently is opening up our social media platforms to departments. So under the original policy, we only allowed the corporate channels and some uniquely branded departments, such as our fire department, police department, to have their own social channels. But after a few years, again, we realized that if there's a business case, our departments should manage their own presence, adopt their own voice, and have some level of autonomy. So that's a quick history of our social media efforts here in Charlotte. So now I'll move on to some of our more fun topics that we've done over the years. As mentioned in the introduction, I was a part of the 2012 Democratic National Convention, and that still is the largest event the city of Charlotte has ever hosted. And of course, with that event, you can imagine that several impacts would occur that require real-time updates, and it was also a time to celebrate the city, as it was a huge honor to host such an important event, and of course have the president in town. We saw that as an opportunity to test out engagement. So before the new policy launched, we were given some leeway to try out this two-way engagement during the convention, and it worked. We came away from that event having established ourselves as a credible source for information. We were able to insert ourselves in conversations taking place around the city. And I'll give you a quick story. During the convention, the day before President Obama was supposed to accept his party's nomination, the venue changed. So it was originally at the Bank of America Stadium, and we had some bad weather coming through, so they changed the venue to be indoors at Time Warner Cable Arena, which is now Spectrum Arena. So you can imagine that within a day, we had to make so many changes and so many updates to residents, and social media really played a huge part in making sure that everyone was aware of the change and what they needed to do to be aware. The next event that we hosted was the 704th campaign. And the 704th campaign is our effort to try some reoccurring campaigns around the 4th of July celebration. So the 704th is the numerical date for July 4th, which is 704, which is also our predominant area code here in Charlotte. So on the 4th of July, we encourage residents to use the hashtag 704 and share photos of how they're celebrating the holiday in Charlotte. And we also manage, because we're government, to sneak in some service impact information along the way. But again, these types of small campaigns are a way for us to have a little fun and step outside of our box from time to time. And the final example I'll share, again, is football related, is Queen City Bowl, which is a campaign that spawned some time back it started off with some banter between ourselves and a Cincinnati Bengals fan. And the Bengals fan made a comment that Cincinnati was the real Queen City. And if you're not aware of the city of Charlotte, we are also called Queen City. So we decided to call up the city of Cincinnati and have a friendly wager that whichever team won that year, which the Bengals played the Panthers that year, whichever team won, that city would be recognized as the official Queen City. So we took time to work with the Panthers, the Bengals, the city of Cincinnati, and to build up momentum around the game. And again, we were able to work in the city angle by sharing the history of Charlotte and make our case for the Queen City. But in the end, I claim that we put in a government jinx because the game ended in a tie. So no one was really able to walk away with the Queen City moniker. But there is a good lesson in preparedness there because our teams, we work with our elected officials and everyone else to draft a statement, a talking point, to line everyone up. And we prepared for a win or a loss, and it ended in a tie. No one had ever thought that it would end in a tie. It was the first one in Panthers history. So there is a lesson there in being prepared for any scenario. So again, along with our day-to-day updates, we try to sneak in a few of the lighthearted campaigns and creative ideas to kind of blend in. But of course, not all of our efforts can be fun, and in some cases, we'll have to address some difficult and at times controversial issues. Over the past few years, we've had our fair share of these issues, and I'll start with the first one. In 2004 with our former mayor, Patrick Cannon. Patrick Cannon was arrested in 2004 for accepting bribes in office. Rather than the arrest, the city really didn't have a message out about the actual event outside of services will be continued to be offered to our residents without being compromised, and that was our key message. But internally, there was an opportunity to make sure that other ongoing communications took on an appropriate tone, and that was for social media specifically. We didn't want to have any of our channels launching a fun campaign or while we're embroiled in the middle of a controversy. So that really set the table for us to talk about the necessity of calling for a moratorium on communications during the crisis. The second issue I'll touch on briefly has been the city's non-discrimination ordinance and House Bill 2. Last year, just a little background information, last year our council approved amendments to the city's non-discrimination ordinance, essentially increasing its list of protected characteristics applying to non-discrimination ordinance. Soon after that, the state passed House Bill 2, which voided our ordinance in full. In the months after, the matter received a massive amount of attention, and of course, it was a subject of debate in great length on social media. We had several conversations about how do we broach this conversation on social, and ultimately we decided that because so many of the conversations taking place were politically charged, it would be difficult for us to remain neutral while being a part of those conversations, so we opted out. By opting out, we also made sure that we were a source of this information. We wanted to make sure that amongst the rumors out there and all of the information going around about our ordinance, we want to make sure that everyone has the correct information about what we put in place and where we are now. During that event, our communications team also created several reports detailing the media coverage and social media commentary. And that really gave our leadership insight on the conversations happening and where we needed to make points of clarification when needed. So the final issue I touch on as far as the difficult times that we've used social media is the officer-involved shooting that took place last September with Chief Lamont Scott. Of course, this was an extremely difficult time for the organization on several levels, and it presented a unique challenge on how we utilize social media in an active crisis. I'll give two examples that sort of stick out in my mind from the incident. First, during the second night of protest, another fatal shooting took place uptown during all the riots in uptown Charlotte. Immediately, we contacted the police department to get the facts to address the rumors that a policeman had fired the shot uptown. And once we got the information, we soon shared that on Twitter, getting that out to our followers. And immediately, we received a ton of information, a ton of feedback. At the time, that was the only official statement that had gone out about the second shooting uptown. And what's really important during a crisis is that you want to be on time, you want to have the information out, and sometimes you don't have the time to have a press release or to position a spokesperson to send out a message. So during that time, social media was the best and the only option to get that information out immediately about that shooting uptown. And I remember sending that tweet out the moments after, and I'm watching the Rachel Maddow show, and as soon as I send the tweet out, moments later, she's reading the tweet out loud. And then soon after that, several national and local outlets are posting that tweet online. So right there shows you sort of the power of social media and how, in a crisis, that may be the only vehicle that people can use to get the information out. The second incident that stands out to me was when the mayor, Jennifer Roberts, called for a curfew on September 23rd. Each night, the curfew would be enacted from midnight until 6 a.m. And this was the first time that a curfew has been enacted during my time here with the city. But I assumed that it was a pretty straightforward process. But as soon as we sent it out, we got a ton of questions via Twitter. And once we got those in, we immediately called our legal experts to help us answer the questions. And we ended up creating an FAQ document based solely from the questions that we received on Twitter and Facebook. And we posted that, and as we received questions throughout the days, we posted the additional questions and answers. And the questions were questions that I never would have thought of. Questions about travelers going back and forth from the airport. Questions about schools. Can your kids be outside waiting for the bus if the curfew is still inactive? What about the homeless? Should restaurants close early? So people had a lot of good questions that we didn't have answers to specifically. So that really served as a great crowdsourcing mechanism to get those answers. In the moment of the shooting, social media really served as a great listening tool and somewhat of, again, a crowdsourcing tool. And overall, the event played out in social media entirely. From the Facebook Live videos that we saw on the scene of the shooting that first alerted us that there was an issue at hand, to the wall-to-wall Twitter coverage that we saw through the demonstrations and the protests. During the communication, during the event, we had a joint information center set up, which is really a team of communication experts who work around the clock to make sure the information goes out accurately and we're able to address any rumors or information coming in. So during the event, we had someone staffed 24 hours at the helm of our social media in case anything needed to go out in the wee hours of the morning. So I think this incident really changed how a lot of our leadership looked at social media, and they were able to see that in critical moments, the speed and awareness that social media provides is invaluable. And I'll say that they were also able to see the magnitude of social media. We use ArchiveSocial to maintain our social public records, and the platform lets you see the number of outgoing and incoming records that you have per month. And last year, we averaged around 9,000 records per month. During September, the month of the shooting, we brought in and pushed out more than 55,000 messages. So right there, they were able to see the magnitude of the social commentary around one event. So as we're becoming more comfortable with engagement on social media, we're now having discussions about how we can engage on a meaningful level during a crisis. In the past, we've taken the role as making sure that everyone has the correct information. We work with educators and informers, but how can we now dive in deeper to be a part of the dialogue? And we're asking ourselves, how can we go beyond the remote control and be a part of the larger conversation, especially with the officer-involved shooting with Keith Lamont Scott. That became a part of the national narrative of police-community relations. And moving forward, we want to challenge ourselves to be a part of that conversation on the digital realm while finding a way to remain neutral. And as with any crisis, you evaluate your performance, and question will always be asked, how can you be better prepared? Again, I mentioned during the Queen City Bowl, we weren't prepared for the event of the time. So as we move forward with crisis communications, how can we be more prepared on social media? How can we have better resources? What questions can we ask beforehand to make sure that we can be a valuable resource for our residents? So that is the end of my presentation, but I'd like to shamelessly encourage you all to follow us on social as we continue to evolve and shape our social media efforts. If you'd like, you can find all of our channels at charlottenc.gov/social. Again, thank you for having me. I enjoyed speaking with you all.
Ken, great job. I mean, that's some compelling stuff. I know when I started my law enforcement career in 1982, we never could have imagined some of the challenges that we would have, this many years later. So great job. I followed what you guys did down there. Great job. Hey, now let's move on to the next part of our conversation here, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Anil Chawla. Anil's the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. Now, before I read you the rest again of his great bio, let's go to our second poll question here. So our second poll question now is, how is your agency currently retaining records of social media? You're not retaining your records and you rely on the networks, which means you rely on Twitter, on Facebook. You take manual captures. That's old school. Screenshots, copy, paste. It's very time intensive too. You use a personal backup tool, something like Backupify, Social Safe. You use an automated solution for archiving, or you're already currently a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So you're not retaining your records. You rely on the networks. You take manual captures, screenshots. You use a personal backup tool. You use an automated tool for archiving, or you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So Anil is also the co-host of the GovTech Social podcast and the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. It's the public sector's leading provider of technology to help government agencies archive and manage risk related to social media. Now, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities such as the City of Raleigh, North Carolina, Hilton Head, South Carolina, City of Dunwoody, PD in Georgia, and the Library of Virginia Main Records and social media for legal protection and public records requirements. The company was selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, recognized in 2014 as a cool vendor in government by leading analyst firm Gartner, and honored as a GovTech 100 company in both 2015 and 2016 by Government Technology magazine. Most recently, though, ArchiveSocial collaborated with the White House to launch the first open archive of presidential social media. Now, that's cool, Anil, but let's get to what our results were here. So we've got 67% of the folks. Wow, two-thirds of you say you don't retain the records and you rely on the networks. About 8% say that they take manual captures, Anil, so we know that's time-intensive. About 5%, 4 to 5% use a personal backup tool. 5% use an automated solution, and 13% are happy ArchiveSocial customers. Wow, but that first number is kind of the one that we want to address on this. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Anil.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for the introduction, and you're absolutely right. That first number, about 70% of agencies relying on the networks. We'll talk a bit about that. I will say that I'm excited from that poll to see about 20% of our attendees using some kind of automated archiving. Now, folks, to step back, I want to thank, first of all, everyone's participation here today. Busy afternoon. I know we have a lot of folks from across the Southeast region tuning in. And particularly want to thank Ken for sharing the perspective and stories out of the city of Charlotte. It's always a lot to learn from a large, prominent city that has a lot of moving parts. And particularly, I really appreciate not only sharing the positive stories of social, but Ken, you being willing to share those difficult situations, because we all face them. And the message that we all hear there is that social media plays a critical role in both the good times and the bad. In both of those types of situations, it's what's giving your agency a voice to set the record straight, to disseminate information to the public and to protect them. So again, thank you for sharing that. And the transition here, Ken mentioned archiving and record keeping, is that to have that voice as an agency, you have to have certain bases covered. You don't want that voice to get cut off, or you don't want that voice to perhaps get you in trouble. So as a government agency, you face legal challenges and policy requirements. And so my portion of the presentation here is to dive into that in a little more detail. Certainly, Charlotte's situation last year speaks to some of the challenges, particularly in a crisis. I'm going to provide some other real-life examples and case studies, and then focus on the record-keeping aspect. We've had these polls about social media being a public record. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the notion of social media creating records outside of public records, but purely as a legal issue, and what agencies have faced, and then what you can do about it. So again, the 70% of you that are relying on the social networks, my goal here today is to give you some actionable path forward on how to better protect your agency, and again, ensure that you have that voice on social that is protected and able to serve your citizens for the long run. Full disclosure, ArchiveSocial is a company that provides record-keeping solutions and archiving, but I want to, again, give you high-level guidance on what you might do and give you a handful of different options here. And on that note, please do ask questions. We have the Q&A window both for Ken and myself, and we'll be sure to carve out some time at the end. So let's take the first issue head on. I think about 20% of the respondents that first poll we're not quite there on social media as a record. In fact, I think about 5% said it's not a record from your perspective. And so I really want to change your mind on that because this was somewhat of an open question, as social media was an emerging platform for government. But as you saw with Ken's presentation, not only for the city of Charlotte, but for the vast majority of agencies across the country, social media has really moved along as a critical way to communicate and also a more free way for you to communicate as an agency. And ultimately what this comes down to is that every state has a records law. The records law was written a long time ago. Here in North Carolina, we have the GS 132 statute. And these laws may seem like they may not be applicable because they're so old, but in fact they were written in a way that was future-proofed. Virtually every records law, whether you're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, has the same kind of language about what defines a public record is not the physical form it comes in, but really the characteristics, the content of the data, of the communication. So a really easy example is if you've received a crime tip, it really doesn't matter the physical form of that crime tip. If that's on a piece of paper, in an email, or a Twitter direct message, or a Facebook comment, crime tip is a crime tip, and that's what constitutes a record. So while not everything on social media constitutes records, social media certainly, if you're engaging in a two-way conversation, can create records based on the nature of that content. So this is one example from North Carolina. I will say that what's happened in the last 4 to 5 years as we've been running these polls and talking to agencies across the country, is that state by state, each state has actually come out with its own guidance clarifying the records law and it really confirming that social media does generate public records that must be maintained. In North Carolina, we've had that guidance since 2009 from our Department of Cultural Resources. But if you're not in North Carolina, I wanted to share this resource with you where we have guidance state by state. No matter which state you're in the United States, you can go to this website, and the URL here is coming up, bit.ly/SM public records, social media public records. Check that out. Go to your state's page, and you can see the latest guidance from your Secretary of State's office, your governor's office. This is not from ArchiveSocial, but we're consolidating it. This is guidance from your state that we're consolidating in one place to help you better understand the issue in your locality. Now, that's from a law standpoint, but one of the really exciting things that's happened recently is the news that's come out around the presidential transition. And so hopefully all of you have seen this in some form or another. We all know that we are getting a new president this Friday. And President Obama, given the time frame in which he became president and also the philosophy of his administration, really was our first social media president. And the White House made one of their key imperatives the preservation and retention of the entire administration's social media content. So what I'm saying here is that even the highest office in the land is subject to public records law. In fact, there's a law known as the Presidential Records Act. And the White House knew that this was important from the beginning. They've taken steps to address it. And here at the presidential transition, they are capturing that content from the entire administration, transferring that to National Archives to fulfill that legal requirement. So again, at the highest office in the land, this is an issue, and it goes all the way to the smallest agencies, cities and counties in the country. And just a quick plug, while I'm going to talk generally about record keeping, at ArchiveSocial, we're really proud that we had this opportunity to assist the White House with capturing this data and transferring it. But we also did launch this open archive to the general public. So as a citizen of the United States, wanted you to be aware of this asset that retains the history of this presidential administration. It's an archive of all the social media, over 250,000 posts available to all of you to take a look at and to see how the presidency approached various issues across the past 8 years. And you can learn more about that at our website at archivesocial.com/whitehouse. So let's talk about this data being on the network. Even the president's office, the White House, had to take steps to capture this data, and we were able to help them with that. Why couldn't they just rely on Facebook and Twitter? Why can't you as an agency just rely on Facebook and Twitter? And the simple answer is this. The social networks have made no guarantees, no promises that they will retain your data per governmental record-keeping requirements. Yes, do they want to have your data? Yes, should it be there if it hasn't been tampered with or deleted? It should, but your record-keeping requirements as an agency could span multiple years, and the fact is anybody can hit delete. Your staff could hit delete. Hopefully they won't do that, but it happens. But also citizens can hit the delete button on a message they've sent you. And we have to remember with public records law, it's not just about what you say. It's also important to think about the content you receive. The communications are transmitted back and forth. Content you received can be record, and a citizen could delete that or even delete their entire profile, which takes their content with them. So we actually at ArchiveSocial conducted a study last year and continue to track this in the background and hope to have updated stats coming into the new year here. But from last year, we did this study in the month of January, and we tracked 400 Facebook pages out of our customer base of government agencies. At that time, we sampled 400 pages. And we actually have the technology to detect deletions. And here's exactly why you can't rely on the networks. Well, in that 1 month period, those 400 Facebook pages encountered nearly 7,800 deletions. Almost 20 a page. Now, not every Facebook page had a deletion, but 3 out of 4 did. And most of it's surprising. For most of our customers, again, they're not deleting. They don't know that the citizens are deleting, but this was a way to really prove it out. In fact, some of these agencies had dozens of deletions, records that were of value, and once they're deleted from Facebook, it's gone. In fact, Facebook's website, if you're in law enforcement, you may have seen Facebook's page on law enforcement. Facebook says that you're allowed to subpoena them, of course, for content, but that you should issue that subpoena before anything's deleted, because once it's deleted, again, there's no promise or guarantee that you'll ever be able to get to it again. So you have to take record keeping into your own hands, and again, when you look at those state-by-state resources I talked about, in certain states, the guidance has been very, very clear that you must get the data in your control as an agency. So those are the requirements. Let's take this to day-to-day in the real world. We've heard from Ken, again, with the city of Charlotte, the 5x increase in social media content during the month of the officer-involved shooting. And so how and when are social media records created? Even if you think that generally your social media presence is very simple, you're not generating records of value, perhaps. What are the situations when that does happen? And the first example, for better or worse, is in a crisis situation. Now, the positive note here, and the reason why I talk about this, is that social media is a new and incredibly powerful tool for government agencies in terms of crisis situations. While the situation itself can be deeply tragic, deeply painful, the silver lining here is social media allows you to communicate, inform the citizens, protect the citizens in a way that we never could before. And so this is these types of situations is where having that Twitter presence and that engaged audience and that Facebook presence really has immeasurable benefits. And so not only with the shooting in Charlotte, but a key example from last year of truly amazing use of social media, while a horrific incident was from the city of Orlando police. Now, this is the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States, but the Orlando police immediately knew what they had to do with their social media presence, and in the middle of the night, they sent this tweet saying, all updates from this Twitter account. So again, crisis, big or small, certainly you want to communicate rapidly. You're going to communicate really hard-hitting information, really important information. It's only on your Twitter feed. You're generating records, and you need to have some way to retain it. Now, on the flip side, we have also seen over the years that there are real-world crisis situations, and then there are crisis situations that manifest online. And so you may have seen this in the news with the city of South Daytona. A woman posted this really terrible photo of her dog's mouth being duct taped online. Thought it was funny, and of course it wasn't. And this photo went viral. Now, the thing is, the city of South Daytona had nothing to do with this posting. In fact, the woman who posted it wasn't in South Daytona, but her profile happened to location tag her as being from South Daytona and being in South Daytona. And so when this went viral on the internet, outside of the city's control, the city received the brunt of the criticism and response, where citizens said, why are you letting this happen? How can you not arrest this woman? This is animal cruelty. And they came at the city in a really strong fashion. And so again, this city that had a handful of social media postings per week had 20,000 comments in just a few days. So these crisis situations can be overwhelming, and you have to communicate. The city of South Daytona did a magnificent job informing the citizens, being very transparent, helping with the investigation, keeping people up to date. But again, a situation where it's a sensitive topic, the national media was making records requests, and all of this exists on social media. So you have to have the archiving, because this is when records will get generated. And then finally, as Ken shared with the curfew situation, Outside of the immediate crisis, there's this longer tail. And then generally people have questions. So in the curfew situation, people are asking questions. Day in and day out, if people are asking questions, you're providing clarifications, you're providing customer service to your citizens, and could certainly be generating records. Ultimately, this data, the fact is, if you're engaging in social media in this two-way capacity, in a meaningful capacity, you will generate records. The question then becomes who's asking for them. And so we have seen very specific records requests, like the one you see on the screen, asking exactly for Twitter content, Facebook content. In fact, this tweet says, I want the archives of the Twitter feeds and consider this a Public Records Act request. So it was a public records request for social media, using social media. We have seen those situations more and more. But the bigger issue that we encounter with our customers and agencies that have dealt with records requests around social is that more and more general requests will include social media. So if you look at this bottom section, and during a winter storm, for example, you've used Twitter and Facebook and our channels to notify people about street closures, maybe provide clarifications, provide answers, and then you get a records request about all notifications of the street closure. Your social media might actually have been the most important component of those communications. All emails and communications is often a way that these records requests are phrased, and because social touches everything you do and is such an important channel these days, it's very likely that a records request that doesn't specifically call out Twitter, Facebook, and social content should be responded to with the social content, because that's where, again, a great amount of real records were generated. So a lot to think about there. I want to tell just a few quick stories that you may not have heard about in national media, but really speaks to the importance of being proactive as an agency. And then we'll talk about how you can be proactive in a very simple manner. And it pays dividends to be proactive in government and to cover your bases and to fulfill your policies. And the first situation is out of Margate, Florida, where Margate had a very clear policy on what's spam, what's allowed to be posted on the page, and a citizen kept promoting their own local website, their own local business on the city's pages. So the city did exactly what they should do. They enforced their policy. They removed those citizens' comments that were self-promoting. And the citizen actually responded back saying, hey, you can't do that. This is Florida. There's a public records law. Social media certainly falls underneath that. You can't just remove my content. And the city clarified that, well, yeah, we understand that. And while we removed the content per our policy, we also retain records because we use ArchiveSocial. And the citizen then came back and issued a public records request saying, well, I think you're singling me out. I want to see everything you've removed or hidden in the last few months to see how you are enforcing your policy. So a lot of agencies have a policy. A lot of agencies enforce that policy as they should. But then you have to be able to also, you may be in a situation where you need to demonstrate that you've been fair and consistent. And that's exactly what happened at Margate. Now, again, with an archive solution in place, very easy for them to run a few searches, produce the PDFs of all of the content, whether it's on Facebook now or not, and show what was hidden and how they'd enforce their policy very consistently. So weathered that request and showed that they were doing exactly what they're doing, and they're able to continue to operate and enjoy the many benefits of social media. And we've got a webinar link here in the slide deck when this goes out, much like this presentation, where you can hear the story directly from Margate. And then outside of situations involving individuals, again, we talked about crisis situations, and one more example for you, San Marcos, Texas. Texas had the worst flooding in the history of the state in 2015. And what often happens in a crisis situation is that afterwards people have a lot of questions, and then they issue a lot of public records requests. And so San Marcos was in the middle of the state, so it was in the middle of the flooding, and this is the Memorial Day flood during the Memorial Day timeframe. Did a lot of their public awareness announcements, a lot of information gathering using social media. So again, social media was critical in this crisis. And right after, of course, they received public records requests, so they're able to use their social media archive to respond to those records requests. But one more interesting thing happened. Because they were archiving and record keeping, the team decided to go ahead and use the social media archive to create a timeline for the disaster, to understand exactly how it unfolded, review how they responded, review the kind of content that was coming in from citizens, and figure out what the citizens cared about. And they used that record that they were keeping to refresh and update their emergency response strategy And it really paid off because it turned out 6 months later, another flood hit on Halloween weekend, and San Marcos was that much more ready. So having a record has a lot of benefits, not only from a public record standpoint, from a legal protection standpoint, but it is a history of how your agency responded, something, what kind of information you received. There's a lot that you can learn out of it. So let's now switch gears to solving this challenge. If I've shifted your perspective, or at least raised the urgency in your mind in terms of thinking about your social media as a first-class communication, because that's what it is today, and have you now thinking about, well, we do need to have record keeping here, how much you approach it. And again, I want to give you some high-level guidance. Ultimately, you do want to look for archiving technology. Again, we're not the only provider of this type of technology, but there's a big difference between backing up or taking simple copies of something and truly archiving. What your agency probably does today for email is archive it, and you should do the same for your social media. So let's talk about what to look for in a social media archiving solution. And we at ArchiveSocial, this is our entire focus. When we started the company, we boiled this down to 4 key factors that any social media archiving solution must address. And then, in fact, we look at these as how to create the best, the most effective archiving solution. So these are the criteria that we test ourselves upon. And the first is frequency. This is data that sits on Twitter and Facebook. It can be deleted. It can disappear, as we talked about. So you need to get this data in your control, and you need to do it quickly. You want to look for archiving technology that can capture content from Twitter, Facebook, Vimeo, Pinterest, Google+, Flickr, all these different sites in near real time. Get it in your control. You do want to be comprehensive because not all of social media generates records of value, but you need to have all of it, though, to curate it, figure out what is of value, and to hold on to it. You do need both sides of the conversation. And there's this issue of metadata that we'll touch on briefly, where it's not just what you see on the tweet or on the Facebook post, but there's a true electronic record. Again, thinking about social media as important of a record as, say, email is. So we'll talk about how to be more comprehensive here. Authenticity is really about the fact that you will have record keeping because of legal needs. You want to be legally protected, so make sure your data is authentic. Any solution that converts the data or takes shortcuts is going to create a record that may not hold up in court. So look for archiving techniques and solutions that produce content that is of evidentiary quality. And then finally, context. This is perhaps the most overlooked, or was the most overlooked in the archiving space, and something that we really focus deeply on, which is social media is a living, breathing conversation. A comment may come in on something from a long time ago. There's live video, there's photos. And how do you reproduce that in a way that makes sense? So we'll talk a bit about what it looks like to have true context so that you can actually respond to a records request effectively and know that you did that correctly. So let's dive briefly in the few minutes that we have remaining here into some of those issues, just to give you some more clarity on what to look for in an archiving approach. I mentioned this in the topic of metadata, something that's been in the news, particularly due to political discussions. So you all may have more familiarity now in the last year than most people do. But it's a technical term, really, about data that describes the data. And really, the key point here is that when you have something like a tweet that's at most 140 characters, in this case 126 characters, that's not the full electronic record. You may see the 126 characters, but the full electronic record has all sorts of information about the user IDs that posted the tweet or who it was directed to, the timestamp information, the location information of the person that posted it if they tagged the tweet with that, the Twitter client that was used to post it. That's the metadata. And so for a tweet that's 100 or so characters, there may be over 2,000 characters of metadata. So you need a solution that has that full electronic record, because every state in which metadata has come up in a lawsuit in terms of understanding whether metadata is part of the public record. The 2 states where this has happened, both states have ruled that the electronic metadata is just as much public record as the content that you see. So very important with social media. And then the other thing that I like to really harp on is that it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we just back up Facebook or Twitter. But just think about Facebook, for example. It's a very complex network. The communications are multi-leveled. And so for any archiving solution you look at, please don't treat archiving social media as an afterthought. Think about the complexity there and feel confident that the solution, even if they claim that they archive Facebook, really test it. Figure out, are they archiving all of the specifics? Because when it comes to legal situations, the details really matter. And so a few examples here on Facebook with comments for a few years now, you as a city or a county, you can reply to the citizens' comments, and it creates this this conversation. And so does the archiving solution receive not only comments from citizens, but your comments to their comments? That's not something that all archiving solutions are effectively capturing. Does it capture the ongoing conversation where comments may show up on something months or even a year later after that thing was posted? Does it get all that multimedia, not only in what you posted, but the citizens may respond back with multimedia? What about live streaming? Does the archiving solution capture the live stream? So a lot of things to think about in terms of the details. And then ultimately, it is a living, breathing conversation. So we have an example here where you might do a search for something and find a comment, but a comment alone doesn't tell the whole story. So look for a solution that can replay your social media. And the example I have here is that this comment gets replayed into the entire Instagram post with the photo on it, with the other comments. Look for a solution that can allow you to reconstruct, give you that context, so that you can really make sense of these records months or years after the fact when they are being requested or you need to pull them. And one of the best examples of that comes right back to one of the case studies I mentioned, which was the Margate example. Just a refresher on that. This is a situation where a citizen was posting spam, basically, promoting their own business, and the city removed their comments. And then the citizen requested that the city produce all of the deletions and hidden posts from the last few months. Well, this is an actual PDF export of that records request from our system, and this speaks to context. Now, the Margate could have come back, and a system could come back with just the comments that were deleted as the result of that records request. But seeing the comments alone doesn't really tell the story, and it may lead to more questions and a back and forth. And so look for a system that reconstructs this information. So they may have searched for all deleted comments in our system, but when they hit that button to turn it into a PDF, our system reconstructed the entire conversation, put it into a PDF where now when you send it to somebody, they see the whole conversation, and then the records that they were really interested in are just highlighted. And that level of context, by the way, putting it in PDF as a necessity, is really, really important, again, to be able to efficiently respond to a records request and avoid the back and forth and potential risk of people being confused about what you're providing them with. So those are the kinds of things that we suggest you look at when it comes to record keeping, and again, evaluate the various archiving solutions out there to ensure that your agency is protected. Now, one other thing I'll mention is that, as we saw at San Marcos, it's not just about records and producing the records, but an archive can provide other value. So some technology that we've developed and we have in place with a number of agencies now allows the agency to more actively manage risk as this content comes into the archive. So you can do things like receive alerts for whenever someone violates your policy. So not only do you have the record of them violating your policy that you then have to write, you have an alert that allows you to know about it right away and then act on it. Or receive an alert for, say, perhaps somebody asking you a question so that you can be more responsive and minimize that risk. And then ultimately you can reflect on what's happening through analytics and reporting. So again, having the data is a legal requirement for your public records laws, but there's also a lot of value that you can get out of this to protect your agency and manage risk, improve your strategy by really acting on that data. And so that's something that archiving technology can provide as well. And what I'll do is I'll wrap up here as we're getting close to the questions. Today's conversation, Ken touched on the crisis situation in Charlotte. I mentioned the Orlando situation. Last year was a trying time for the country, and we all hope that these types of events do not continue in 2017. But the reality is, day in and day out, there are crisis situations. They may be very small. They may not get national media attention. But one thing that I want to share with you is a pro bono effort from ArchiveSocial. We recognize that while we think that everybody needs to be archiving, we know that's the requirement. We recognize that there are budget challenges and there are other issues where you might not have archiving in place today. So if you find yourself in crisis, whether that's a real-world crisis or it's a crisis that overwhelms your presence because of something going viral, we will actually give you 100% free access to our technology for 30 days to get you through that crisis. No strings attached. We want to help you out. We've built a business on the public sector. This is our way of giving back. And we'll produce the information for you, we'll archive it, produce it so that you're protected from records requests and legal requests that may come out of that crisis. So give you a little limited amount of access, but for a full 30 days you have all of our capabilities to protect your agency. So go to this website if you're in crisis, and we'll do our best to help you out there. And with that, I'm going to take it to my contact information. And I wanted to just check the time here. One of the things that we talked about, looks like we have a lot of questions that came in. So I wanted to mention, along with the archive that we created for the Obama administration that's out and available, that they're not the first to have an open archive. So I want to give a shout out to the city of Charlotte, actually, as an agency that decided to be as transparent as possible. So not only is Charlotte archiving social media, but they have an open archive of social media ahead of the president doing it. So I wanted to mention that as an example, as all of you are taking a look at Charlotte's approach to social media and their approach to transparency, that they've gone to the fullest extent to not only archive, but make that data open and available. Yeah, and so quick mention of that, and back to you, Morgan, for questions.
Hey, Neil, great job, guys. As you guys can see, there's a lot of good information in here. We actually, folks, this has been a well-attended webinar. We have a lot of questions still coming in. So what I want to do is get to that. We have some questions. Remember, we're going to send out a link. You're going to get everything today, the whole recording. We're going to send to you in 48 hours. If you want to download the slides, just click on your webinar resources at the bottom, download that PDF. So let's hop into some questions right away. Ken, this one's for you. First one came from Phyllis Whitley. Albany Police Department. I assume that's Albany, New York, but I could be wrong. But she said, Ken, did the choice to engage cause many difficulties for your city? Can you give an example of where making the choice went bad or went good? And I assume it was that transition period from when you were just Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, to you're really engaging now with the citizens in the community.
Sure, and thanks for the question, Phyllis. While we were engaging during the Keith Lamont Scott shooting, there weren't many interactions that I would categorize as bad. There was one in particular that did stand out. We had someone who sent us some messages who they weren't really pleased with the way the city of Charlotte handled the entire situation. And typically what we do is when someone takes the time to engage us about a topic extensively, we tend to follow them to kind of have a dialogue. And after we followed them, they questioned why we followed them and speculated that Big Brother was trying to watch them, and we took the time out to stop and say, hey, and explain why we followed them. And we actually were able to engage in some good back and forth. At the end of the conversation, they walked away maybe not completely satisfied with the real world incident, but they were at least happy at the way we handled the situation on social media. So that was a positive interaction. And I would say that goes for almost any interaction that we have. Someone may not walk away satisfied with what happens in the real world, but at least we make an effort in the social realm to engage.
And Anil, let me piggyback on that for you, because sometimes there are dangers in starting to engage without having clear policies or really thinking this through. Kind of expound on that a little bit. If you're going to engage, what are kind of some of the things that you've seen over these years now that's really going to make that engagement effective, make it productive?
You're absolutely right. It does come down to policies and being prepared for it. You don't want to go in there willy-nilly without understanding the approach and kind of the lines to draw as an organization. So this not only comes down to policy, but training as a staff. Some of the agencies that we work with actually go through mock exercises of, this were to happen on our social media presence or happen in the real world, how would we respond with social? In fact, in some cases, they can responses or template responses that they can adjust when that actually happens. And that makes a lot of sense, honestly, for a lot of regions. Certain regions will deal with a kind of almost a predictable crisis. So if you're in Florida, for example, South Florida, expect a tropical storm type situation every once in a while, or a hurricane, and can that information. So it comes down to training. You do want to have the policies for sure, absolutely. In terms of a crisis or a sensitive situation, you have to have the record keeping to comply with the records laws. You have to expect that you'll get some kind of request on that at some point. And then you want to have clear policies on what you will do in regards to third-party content. So it may be that in these situations that there's a lot of noise from the citizens and so forth, and there may be times where you want to remove or hide content to keep a post as informative as possible. So getting those policies straight up front is an absolute necessity.
And my apologies to Phyllis. It was Albany, Georgia, not New York. Big difference in temperature and accent. So let's go to the next one. Cameron Wolfson from City of Charleston. And Ken, this again is directed at you. He's asking, Ken, is there any centralized oversight over the departmental social accounts?
Yes. So I work in my organization's corporate communications and marketing office. And my job, in addition to managing the corporate pages, is to oversee the department pages. Now, that doesn't mean I'm watching every minute, every second of what they're doing, but we have a compliance protocol that speaks more to the content and making sure that they're not using any content that isn't trademarked or we don't own or that would violate any of our other policies. So we take a look at their pages at random a few times a month just to make sure they're adhering to our policies. And we also have a social media subcommittee where we meet on a bi-monthly basis to kind of talk about any issues we're having. So it's a team effort as far as oversight goes, but my department is responsible for oversight officially.
Yeah, and Anil, I want to take that, but I want to bounce into a great question we just had come in, and it was from David Rotenizer. Sorry, I'm going to get this wrong. The type on here is kind of small, but it kind of goes to one of the questions in terms of what does ArchiveSocial capture, and what David was asking about was tourism. He says, we are a small local government tourism program, active use of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. Should these be archived? If so, how and why? So kind of taking that question about centralizing now, what about centralizing all of your other social media accounts? What should be captured?
Absolutely. So the move to archive for a vast majority of our customers has played a big part of that. Has been contingent on this notion that there needs to be more oversight in government. Government's distributed, and social media tends to be distributed because individual departments and teams and people are empowered to post. And so really core to record keeping, one of the key benefits is this centralization and this oversight. And I mentioned in my presentation that not only archiving it and having it in one place, but being able to apply alerting and analytics technology to it is something that's been very valuable for a lot of organizations. Now, in terms of the tourism question, as a government, as any public entity, you're just as subject to public records laws as anything else. And it really does come down to the nature of your content and your engagement, but certainly, information about the use of tax dollars, for example, economic development programs, maybe clarifications. Any of that engagement could create records. And so you should look at it because as a government agency, you're subject to the records law, and certainly if your social media is touching on content that falls within your retention schedules, then you must archive that social media to fulfill those requirements.
And here's one that I'm going to toss out for both of you, and it comes from Michelle Mills, Alamance County. I believe it's there in North Carolina. We talked about this discussion around whether social media is a record. She noted that it's interesting because their attorney said that the attorneys believe that because the content is owned by a third party, and their social media is not a public record. He did say that the school of government and the state disagree. Are there, kind of, Anil, and also with you, Ken, what are some of the exceptions to this? But why should you always err on the side of just capturing it just in case?
This is a viewpoint that has come up without question, and of course, I'd side with the school of government and the state on this topic, as well as every state would have evaluated this topic. That the social media content is your responsibility, and I think that I'm reading into the question a little bit to when we've heard this question before. If I understand it correctly, the question is, well, because this is on Facebook and Twitter, doesn't Facebook own this content or Twitter own this content? And the reality is that it's no different than, say, having your email hosted. We all know that when you send an email, that's a public record that you're responsible for. We all know that when you receive emails, we all have that disclaimer that this could be a record that could be disclosed to third parties. So use that analogy with social media. As an agency, you've decided to use Facebook. Even though Facebook's hosting it, it was your decision to be there. You've created that presence. You're sending information. You've created that presence to actively receive information. You are responsible for it. And again, taking it to email, if just because you host your email on Office 365 doesn't suddenly make Microsoft the owner of your email. You as an agency are responsible for it. You can think of Facebook just like Facebook's hosting your social media, just like an email provider might host your email. So I hope that helps as an analogy. And I think that one thing that often helps with the attorneys is kind of walking through the actual social media content you have, because a lot of attorneys may not be that active on social media in our experience, at least in your city or county's social media. And so showing them real-life examples of the kind of information you're receiving, and I think it'll better click that, okay, we received this crime tip on Facebook. Of course, that's a record sent to us. We're using it to investigate the crime. We're responsible for it, not Facebook itself.
Right. And Ken, what did you guys do around that point? I mean, is it pretty clear? Do you guys does everybody understand social media as a record? Do you do training around it? How do you make it very clear for anybody who uses your social media accounts?
Sure. Well, we do some training as far as records management goes across all of our records, but we really made the decision to go with an archiving service because we were not comfortable with depending on the actual platforms to manage and pretty much own the existence of our records. And a prime example would be Vine recently, as of yesterday, I believe, shut down their platform. So if an agency had a video of a crisis moment on Vine, it's gone unless you remember to save it. With ArchiveSocial, you don't have to remember to save anything. It saves automatically, and it's also nice to have that metadata that goes beyond the 140 characters on Twitter. So we really just weren't comfortable with depending on the platforms to manage our data.
Right, and folks, there's a lot more we could talk about. We have quite a few questions here in the queue that I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to because we did make a commitment. We want to be respectful of your 1 hour. So what I want to do is wrap it up here at this point and say thank you. First of all, thank you, Ken, to you for coming on, sharing your expertise, your experiences. Those things around the shooting, around the DNC are just seminal case studies people should take a look at. And obviously we can't do this without our great partners like ArchiveSocial. So remember, everybody, you're going to get these links within 48 hours. Make sure you share it with your friends. Make sure you do fill out the survey that's going to pop up here at the end. We want to say thank you for spending 1 hour with Government Technology, the Center for Digital Government, ArchiveSocial, and the City of Charlotte, talking about from road building to riots. So, folks, stay safe out there. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon on another Government Technology event. Everybody have a great afternoon.